There's a truth almost no one dares to say, and maybe that's because it hurts. Most of our deepest emotional wounds didn't come from romantic breakups, professional failures, or even visible external traumas. They started much earlier, hidden in the silent spaces between what was, or wasn't, our mother's love. Maybe your childhood seems normal at first glance. Maybe you say your mother did the best she could. And that's true, she probably did. But that doesn't erase the invisible impact your earliest interactions with her left on your unconscious. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And what lies in the unconscious of almost all of us? The imprint of our relationship with our mother. The way she looked at you or looked away. The way she held you or silenced you. The tone of her voice, the rhythm of her affection, the emotional climate of the home. All of it laid the foundation for how you believe, or don't believe, you deserve to be loved. This isn't about blame. It's about seeing. Because until you bring that primary bond into the light, you'll keep repeating patterns of abandonment, rejection, and self-sabotage, without knowing why. You'll keep chasing approval, comparing yourself, shaping yourself to please others. And you'll call that a personality. But in truth, it's only emotional survival. And healing will only begin when you understand that your wound didn't start with you, but it's now your responsibility. Your mother may have been wonderful, or she may have failed you deeply. But healing doesn't require her to change. It requires you to see with clarity, and to find the courage to feel what was once impossible to feel. From the moment you arrived in the world, and even before, still in the womb, your nervous system began learning what it means to exist. And that learning didn't come from words, theories, or conscious teachings. It came from your mother's body, her emotions, the way she related to the world, and to you. If she was anxious, your body learned that the world is unpredictable. If she was depressed, your body learned that connection can feel like absence. If she was loving but unstable, you learned that love comes with tension. And so, before you even developed language, your emotional brain was already being programmed. Like soil receiving a seed long before knowing what will grow, your nervous system learned either to feel safe, or to distrust life. This shows up today in subtle yet powerful ways. The inability to fully relax, the constant need to please, guilt when setting boundaries, an irrational fear of being abandoned, the habit of erasing yourself in relationships. These are symptoms of a body that never learned what safe presence feels like. And often it started in your mother's arms. Not out of malice, but inheritance. Her pain was passed down like an invisible code. A silent legacy. And if you've never asked yourself, how did my mother feel in the world? You may be living out an emotional script that isn't truly yours, but has become your reality. The good news is that by recognizing this pattern, you can begin to reprogram your nervous system. And that's where true liberation begins. When you stop seeking on the outside the comfort your body still longs for, and start giving yourself the presence you never had. Healing, in this context, is more than understanding your mind. It's teaching your body that it's finally safe to live, even if it never felt that way before. Most mothers love their children, there's no doubt about that. But love alone is not enough to ensure a child feels safe, seen, and emotionally nourished. And this is where the confusion begins. We grow up believing that if our mother loved us, then we have nothing to complain about. No reason to feel pain or disconnection. And yet, there's a vast difference between love and emotional presence. A mother can work all day to provide for the household, do everything to make sure nothing is lacking, even say, "I love you," every single day, and still be emotionally absent. This often happens when she's overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, or stuck in her own unresolved wounds. In those cases, the child notices the love, but doesn't feel the connection. And the child's body records this as rejection, as a vacuum, as absence. It's in that silent space that many emotional wounds are formed, not in what the mother did wrong, but in what she couldn't offer emotionally. The good enough mother, a concept coined by Donald Winnicott, is not a perfect mother. She's one who is emotionally present enough for the child to feel safe exploring the world, knowing there's a nurturing embrace to return to. When that doesn't happen, the child internalizes the belief that their emotions are too much, that vulnerability is a burden, that it's not safe to depend on anyone. And they carry that belief into adulthood, becoming someone who cares for everyone but themselves. Who finds it easier to give than to receive. Who feels guilty for having emotional needs. Recognizing this wound is not about blaming the mother, it's about freeing yourself from the unconscious expectation that she will one day offer something she may have never been able to give. And from that place, making room for reparenting, becoming the adult your inner child always longed to find. That is the turning point in any journey of deep healing. Imagine growing up in an environment where you rarely feel seen. Where your emotions are ignored, minimized, or even mocked. When a child expresses sadness and hears, "Stop crying, it's nothing," or shows anger and is told, "Don't speak to your mother like that," something profound begins to break inside. The child starts to learn, without anyone ever saying it outright, that their emotions aren't valid. And this learning becomes a silent pillar of their identity. The child grows up believing their feelings are wrong, too much, inconvenient. So they start to hide them. They suppress their pain, their fear, their anger. But what's repressed doesn't disappear. It simply moves into the unconscious. And that's where it quietly begins to influence decisions, relationships, and the way this person sees themselves. The invisible child becomes the adult who's constantly apologizing for existing. Who's always chasing approval. Who's afraid to upset others, afraid to make mistakes, afraid of being a burden. Because deep down they still carry the belief that being their true self isn't enough to be loved. This pain of not feeling seen is one of the deepest roots of low self-esteem and existential disconnection. And the most devastating part is that it often doesn't come from major traumas, but from the constant repetition of small invalidations. No slap, no shouting. Just a silence that cuts. Averted eyes. Chronic emotional absence. And yet, it's precisely this subtle and persistent pain that shapes the wound of identity. Healing begins when you recognize the existence of that invisible child within you and, with compassion, choose to bring them into the light. To validate what no one ever validated. To listen to what was never heard. To feel what was never allowed. Because only then can the adult you are today begin to feel whole, not by fixing the past but by finally becoming someone who truly sees themselves. There is a silent pain that eats away from the inside, the pain of waiting for love from someone who doesn't know how, or simply can't, love. Many adults carry this pain without being able to name it because its roots run deep, and it almost always begins in the relationship with the mother. An emotionally unavailable mother isn't necessarily physically absent. She might be there every day taking care of the house, preparing meals, making sure everything is in order. But emotionally, she's not present. She doesn't ask how you feel. She doesn't look into your eyes with true presence. She doesn't celebrate your accomplishments with genuine enthusiasm, nor hold your sadness with empathy. She has no inner space to hold someone else's pain, because often she never had space to deal with her own. And that is devastating for a child. Because in childhood, what shapes our sense of worth and safety is not physical presence alone, but the quality of that presence. The child who grows up with an emotionally unavailable mother begins to believe they're the problem. That they need to do more, be better, try harder, all in the hope of earning scraps of affection. And that belief turns into a pattern that follows them into adulthood. People who find themselves in relationships where love always requires too much effort, where affection feels conditional, where being loved feels like a task. The emptiness left behind by a mother who had nothing to give becomes an internal void that desperately tries to fill itself with everything. Overworking, toxic relationships, compulsive spirituality, constant anxiety. But nothing fills it, because what's missing isn't something external. It's the internal validation that was never installed. Healing begins when you realize, with deep honesty, that your mother simply didn't have it to give. And that it's not your fault. That maybe she was a wounded woman, overwhelmed, emotionally neglected in her own childhood. And that continuing to wait for her to change, to apologize, to offer what she never knew how to give, is to remain trapped in the wounded child who still believes they'll only feel whole once they're finally loved by her. But the liberating truth is, you don't have to wait anymore. You can now choose to care for yourself with the presence that was missing. And while that may not erase the pain, it breaks the cycle. One of the biggest obstacles to emotional healing isn't the direct pain of the wound itself, It's the illusion we create to survive it. Many adults still carry, unconsciously, a subtle but powerful fantasy that one day, somehow, their mother will become the person they always wished she had been. This fantasy shows up in small moments, like waiting for a call that never comes, longing for praise that's never given, hoping for recognition that never arrives. And every time that expectation is unmet, the pain resurfaces as if it were new. But that pain isn't new. It's old. It's the pain of a child still living inside you, clinging to the myth of the ideal mother. A myth that says every mother is loving, nurturing, protective, and if yours wasn't, it must have been your fault. But that myth is cruel, because it keeps you from seeing clearly what actually happened. It holds you in a state of perpetual waiting, delaying your own life. Emotional healing requires the courage to break that illusion. To see your mother as a real human being, limited, flawed, with shadows of her own, not as a goddess or a villain. And in doing so, you let reality in. And with it, the truth. Your mother was exactly what she was capable of being, given the resources she had. No more, no less. This realization, which at first may seem cold, is actually deeply liberating. Because when you take your mother off the pedestal, whether it's the pedestal of idealization or resentment, you can finally turn inward and recognize that you are no longer a child. That you no longer need to shrink yourself to earn affection, or wait for validation from someone who may never be able to give it. You can learn to emotionally nourish yourself, to hold space for your pain, and to build healthy relationships with people who are truly capable of seeing you. This doesn't mean abandoning your mother. It means abandoning the fantasy. And only when the fantasy falls apart can true growth begin. Because growing up is exactly that, letting go of the hope that the past can be rewritten, and choosing instead to build a present where you are the one in charge of your own healing. Many people who grew up with emotionally unavailable, critical, or abusive mothers carry a trait that at first glance seems noble. They are calm, quiet, rarely raise their voice, never explode, never cause trouble. But behind this serene appearance lies deep pain, and even deeper repressed anger. Anger that was never allowed to exist. Because from an early age you learned that showing irritation, sadness, or defiance meant love would be withdrawn. You'd be ignored, ridiculed, or punished. So you adapted, buried your feelings, froze your emotions, and created a version of yourself that felt more acceptable. The calm, rational version who avoids conflict at all costs. But this calm isn't emotional balance, it's dissociation. It's your nervous system still trying to survive the emotionally hostile environment it grew up in. It's your body saying, if I stay invisible, maybe I won't get hurt again. And so, you go on living in a state of emotional freeze, where nothing seems to shake you. But nothing touches you deeply either. Not pain, not joy. Not love, not anger. Life begins to lose its color. Because someone who can't feel anger also struggles to feel genuine pleasure. And here is the hard but necessary truth. Anger is not the problem. The problem is what was done with your anger in childhood, and how much you still believe that expressing it is wrong, shameful, or dangerous. But it's not. Anger is a protective force. It draws emotional boundaries. It's the voice that screams, enough, when something crosses your limits. Relearning how to feel anger is one of the most healing steps in your journey. Not the kind of anger that destroys or lashes out at the wrong people, but the kind that reconnects you to your dignity. The kind that says, I deserved more. I needed care and didn't receive it. That hurt me. And that's okay. The wounded child needs to know it's safe to feel that way. Only when that part of you feels safe to express itself can the adult in you truly begin to heal. And then, real calm, the kind that comes from authenticity, can finally begin to bloom. Not as a mask, but as freedom. There comes a moment in the healing process when there's no more room to run. It's time to face grief. And not the grief of your mother's physical absence, but the symbolic loss of the mother you always dreamed of having. The mother who would truly see you. Who would embrace you without judgment. Who would protect you with both strength and tenderness. The one who would say, you are enough just as you are. But she never came. And accepting that is perhaps the most painful and transformative point of the journey. Because until now, even unconsciously, you may have still been trying to earn that love. trying to be better, to please, to shrink, to become more spiritual, all in the silent hope that one day that emotional mother would finally show up. That one day she would change. That one day she'd look at you and say everything you always longed to hear. But that day never comes. And not because she's cruel, but because she too carries her own wounded child. She too grew up in an emotionally limited environment. And often she's not even aware of the impact she had. The hard truth to accept is that your mother may never apologize, may never change, may never understand. And when you arrive at this part of the journey, something inside you dies, the ideal of the perfect mother. And with that symbolic death comes space for something new to be born. Because only after burying the illusion can you begin to build your own foundation of love, your inner mothering. You become the one who soothes, who validates, who protects. And the wound is no longer an endless void, it becomes fertile soil. Rich ground for a new identity that no longer depends on being seen or approved of. That is liberation. That is emotional maturity. And this grief, as devastating as it may feel at first, is the portal. The portal between your old self, who kept trying to earn love, and your new self, who understands, the love I've been searching for has always been waiting inside me to be awakened. This is the turning point. When you stop being a child of pain and start becoming the parent of your own healing. And that changes everything. And then, in the silence after the storm, something begins to emerge. It's not loud. It's not euphoric. It's subtle but deeply real. It's the feeling that you're coming home, but not to a place outside of you. To an inner home that never existed before. It's no longer about her. Not about what she did or didn't do. It's about what you choose to do now with what was. Because the moment you accept that your mother may never change, you stop wasting energy trying to fix her. And that same energy begins to be redirected toward your own rebuilding. You no longer need her validation because you've learned to validate yourself. You no longer have to prove you're worthy of love because you finally know, you always were. And slowly the figure of the mother stops being a center of lack, and becomes a mirror. A mirror reflecting the choices you can make from this point forward. You can repeat the patterns or you can break them. You can stay stuck in blame or you can take responsibility for creating something new. And here lies the most beautiful part of this journey. When you begin to mother yourself, you change the frequency of your entire lineage. Not by forcing anything. Not by demanding anything. But simply by being the shift your system needed. And sometimes even your mother, without fully understanding it, feels that. And shifts a little too. Because when one link in the chain heals, the entire chain vibrates differently. There's no guarantee everyone will come with you. But you're no longer waiting for that. You now understand that your commitment is to your soul. And to the inner child who waited a lifetime for this inner embrace. From here on, what used to be pain becomes wisdom. What used to be absence becomes power. And what used to be a wound becomes a passage. A passage to a level of freedom that doesn't rely on anyone else understanding you, because you understand. You gave yourself what was missing. And that is the most powerful mother you could have ever met, the one who was born inside you.